Hi friends, my name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. So it's been a few days since I've done a little catch-up. Lots happened, of course. There's always things happening, particularly when it comes to the US and the empire. The US is always scheming and trying to find ways to get its full spectrum dominance. But anyway, I wanted to talk just quickly about the withdrawal, the so-called withdrawal by Donald Trump of troops from Syria. Firstly, I just wanted to share something by Minna Muharesh, who is the editor and founder of Mint Press News, and I invite you to check out Mint Press News. It's a great site. Minna does live streams from Facebook at 9 p.m. CST time, and that's about 2 p.m. Sydney time. So 2 p.m. So she does that on Monday and Tuesday at 9 p.m. CST. From Facebook at Mint Press News. You can find her on Mint Press News. Okay, so I wanted to share something she wrote, which I think is very insightful. She's very insightful about these things, because nothing ever is what it seems when people like Donald Trump say they're withdrawing. You know, the U.S. never voluntarily really wants to ever stop. You know, the weapons manufacturers want more money for weapons, and so it's just a constant seeking out of, you know, war, and but pretending that that they're not doing that, pretending they're doing it for humanitarian reasons or whatever, or seeing themselves as the world's police. That's really funny, but that's actually what the propaganda that's put forward, that they go around trying to help end the turmoil, but in fact they're actually the ones that are causing the turmoil in the world with their constant warmongering and seeking full spectrum dominance. So anyway, here's what Minna said. Let's talk about the US plan to pull out of Syria. There's no question that the US needs to get out of Syria. The problem, though, is with how the US is planning on pulling out of northeastern Syria, because it's the definition of a colonial pullout. Divide, conquer, ravage, exploit, arm all sides and create havoc, then leave. The United States helped the Kurdish militias in northeast Syria by arming them against Syrians, ethnically cleansing Syrians from their hometowns, allowing arms to flow to al-Nusra and ISIS, and aiding Turkey, who doesn't want to empower Kurds in the process. Now that the US is done working with the Kurds after claiming to support their independence, the US is handing over northeast Syria to Turkey. It's a big fat mess that will leave Kurdish militia to fight the Turkish military, possibly alone, who will end up fighting the Syrian army, who will try to regain their land back. This will also create a vacuum for Kurdish-supported militias linked to ISIS to get even stronger, pulling Russia and Iran further into what can be described as a clusterfuck to fight off terrorism. But after the US leaves, it will claim it should have never left because everyone is fighting. This will create a new opportunity for the war lovers to come back to Syria again in the future, or take sides by fighting by proxy or throwing weapons into the mix. This is why US troops need to remain off of other people's lands in the first place. Did you follow that? It's called divide and conquer. So who wins? The weapons manufacturers. So that's an insightful piece by Minna Muharesh from Mint Press News. And I'll just share a couple of little Twitter posts by Michael Preisner from the Empire Files. Michael Preisner is another insightful person, and he said, "Troops out of Syria is great. But why praise the guy who deployed a record number of troops to Syria, occupied a record amount of territory, and killed a record number of citizens? Like Obama in Afghanistan and Nixon in Vietnam, a withdrawal after a massive expansion isn't, quote, anti-war," end quote. And Jama Baraka, he often criticizes U.S. imperialism under a sort of a, he often does that with a take on white supremacy, which is, what a lot of these wars are, white supremacist imperialist wars. And Jama Baraka said, "I'm so glad that I have done the work to decolonize my consciousness. I really feel for those who can be manipulated by the kind of crude propaganda we have seen over the last few days. But being able to think brings the burden of the responsibility for action." He also said, excuse me, "I will stop referring to CNN as the Clinton News Network, and refer to it for what it is, the criminal news network, for pushing straight up US gangsterism. CNN believes the US has the right to invade, occupy, disrupt, and destroy nations, and they call Trump a white supremacist." And Michael Preisner goes on Twitter to say, "And before you get too excited about a supposed withdrawal from Afghanistan, remember Trump's most favorite plan has been to withdraw troops so Erik Prinz can deploy 5,000 plus of his private fascist mercenary army to take their place and slaughter everyone." And he goes on to say on Twitter, "In Afghanistan, Trump reversed trend of Obama's troop withdrawal and increased troops 2 years in a row. Dropped more bombs on the country in 2018 than any year in the entire war. 52% rise in civilian deaths, and despite what's being said, dead set on at least 2 permanent US bases." Michael Preisner, basically, he was also indicating on Twitter that it all looks like, he's actually withdrawing troops, but there's all sorts of special ops and other things that are going on there. So it's just really a propaganda thing for people to think for whatever. So I don't know if it's, Trump is trying to appeal to his base or what he's doing, probably, because in the beginning he was saying to his base that, he wanted to withdraw from various wars and whatever, but, he's done exactly the opposite. They just say whatever they can to get elected, and, Trump is no different. Something that Ben Norton said, which was interesting, and this is something that you'll notice with the mainstream media when Trump ever suggests anything about withdrawing from Syria or whatever. The so-called liberal left, the liberal media, they love war. They get excited about it, and the thought of any withdrawal from it, it sends them into a frenzy. And that includes the celebrities who just take their talking points from people like Hillary Clinton, who's a war criminal, and Obama, who's a war criminal. They just take their talking points from those people. So, celebrities like Mia Farrow sort of said something on Twitter yesterday that you know, Trump withdrawing from Syria is going to make things worse in relation to ISIS, and that it's a gift to Putin and Iran. And I mean, that woman is completely propagandized, and so are most of the celebrities that know nothing about really what's going on and just take their talking points from, you know, from these war criminals. They have no clue. Anyway, so Ben Norton, who's a journalist, an independent journalist, said, embarrassing. MSNBC host Joe Scarborough showed his utter ignorance of Middle East politics today when he claimed Obama withdrew US troops from Iran. It's sickening how MSNBC has become so hawkish. It wants more US war in Syria and depicts the withdrawal as a Russian conspiracy. I mean, honestly, the things become more and more like The Onion. You know, as time goes by, you know, The Onion, which is a satire thing, it's frightening how ridiculous it's gotten with the mainstream media and the sort of propaganda and the constant drumming for war, more war. And of course, these MSNBC and the likes, they have weapons manufacturers like Raytheon and Boeing and all sorts of, you know, all sorts of weapons manufacturers who advertise. You know, so it's just, they're really, at this point, and they have been for a while now, a part of the military-industrial complex. They're just an arm of that, a propaganda arm, and Goebbels would be proud to have such a uniform mainstream media that promotes war like this and just promotes the talking points of the government at the time. So anyway, and as far as Mad Dog Mattis, you know, General Mattis, now suddenly he's this wonderful ethical person who has resigned because he doesn't think it's right to continue on being the defense secretary for Trump. And you get these ridiculous posts on Twitter from mainstream media and from the likes of these celebrities like Mia Farrow, you know, sort of as if General Mattis is some kind of ethical person. My goodness, like, just listen to this. He's the reason he got the nickname Mad Dog. Retired General James Mattis earned the nickname Mad Dog for leading US Marines into battle in Fallujah, Iraq in 2004. In that assault, members of the Marine Corps under Mattis' command shot at ambulances and aid workers. They cordoned off the city, preventing civilians from escaping. They posed for trophy photos with the people they killed. So that's the sort of person that he is. And of course, if anybody pays any attention to what really happens in Afghanistan and Iraq and places like that, everything that happens there is a war crime. The whole thing, war is a crime. It's a crime. So anything under that banner of war, like what's happening, whatever happens in those wars is a crime. So I'm not a big fan of sort of picking out certain instances that happen in these wars and calling them a war crime, because the whole thing is a crime. And so, you know, like if you listen to the podcast Eyes Left, I mention that podcast fairly regularly because it's a podcast by two war veterans, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, Spencer Rapone and Mike Preisner, the person I just read out a couple of his tweets. They talk about what happened when they were there, and also they get information from from soldiers that are currently there. And it's appalling. I think I've mentioned it in one of my other vlogs, how there was this would just be an everyday thing. he was told, this Spencer Pone, no, who was it? Clifton Hicks. I think it was Clifton Hicks. He was a soldier in, Abu Ghraib. So he went into the town of Abu Ghraib, and with his, his corps, his group of soldiers, and you can tell I don't know much about military language. And when they arrived in the town of Abu Ghraib, there was about 700 dead civilians laying on the ground, including sort of animals like horses and dogs, and apparently the whoever had been in there before, another U.S. military unit, had done a free fire, made it a free fire zone, just went in and shot everybody, including the animals. Now that is not an aberration, that is not an unusual circumstance that happened in Iraq and happens in Afghanistan and elsewhere. It's normal. That's how the U.S. empire rolls. That's the modus operandi. So they just go in and it's a free fire zone, they kill everybody. And you can hear that time and time again. That's what happens. And it's no wonder you have 22 military people killing themselves every day, suiciding every day, because this is the sort of dreadful, dehumanizing sort of things that they're involved in. I mean, how can you go back to living a normal life? How can you go back to living a life in society after you've been just mowing down men, women, and children and animals in these towns who've done nothing? You know, they're just innocent people. Even if they're, sort of people that have been sort of retaliating against the occupation of their country, who they call insurgents in quotes. Those people have a right, like Mike Preisner and Spencer Rapone have said in their podcast, Eyes Left, they have a right to retaliate. Their country is being occupied. And then there's a sort of like a collective punishment of their town where they come from. And the reason the US empire just bombs constantly, and they use those AC-180s, I think they call them. They're a very large, very powerful plane that they do these outrageous bombings. It's called the Angel of Death or something they call it. You know, it's a very powerful military plane, and these planes just sort of completely level towns with people in them, incinerating people. And one of the reasons they do that is because they don't want to have a big body count of US soldiers. So they just go in and bomb the bejesus out of these towns. And I've seen footage from these sites on YouTube where, they love showing military assaults against, sort of the Taliban or whatever. And you see them, and it seems like they're so high in the sky that people on the ground, like these Afghanistan, insurgents in quotes, don't even seem to know they're there, and they're basically just mowing them down from this great height. I saw this video it was a nighttime thing, and it didn't seem like they knew this AC-140 or whatever it is was in the sky, and they were shooting these large sort of military canisters. They were these sort of essentially like little bombs that were knocking down trees, and they were shooting them at people. And you could see they were just basically exploding these people on the ground It was all done with that night vision stuff, but you could see they were hitting these people, and sometimes they'd miss them, and a whole pine tree would fall over. I mean, it's insane. And of course, the weapons industries are just clapping their hands because every one of those, you know, sort of armaments, you know, every one of those bullets, every one of those bombs, and whatever they were using on these Afghanistan insurgents, it's all just money. How much money each one of them costs is probably a lot, and they were going through rounds and rounds and rounds of them. You know, it went on and on and on. And they just basically massacred these people who couldn't go anywhere. There was nowhere for them to go. And that's like just a normal thing. These people could be anybody, really. They don't know who the hell these people are. You know, it could be somebody's grandfather who's, you know, who knows? Like, anyway, these are human beings. And here they are, just mowing them down. I mean, I can't even really watch it. Like, I've actually put some footage on one of my vlogs to go with a podcast, part of a podcast that Mike Preisner and Spencer Rapone did. And so I wanted to sort of show how sort of cold-blooded and awful it is. But it really was hard for me to select these this footage because it's just so awful and cold-blooded.
There's personnel right there.
Get ready! Get ready!
We have a little more.
Get ready! Get ready!
You're gonna get him.
Watch that moss over there too.
Roger.
Right,
Get
he's
in
running
the mosque.
into the mosque.
Get vehicles. Get ready! Go into the building to put the 105s in. That's right.
Stand by. Wildfire, we cleared on the building.
You're cleared on the big square building. You can go ahead and level it.
Roger that. Clear the
Correct.
building, guys.
Get ready!
Okay,
Get ready!
catching up with you over the building.
Roger.
Are you there? TV's no use on target. Gonna scan the area.
Checking the vehicles too.
You are cleared to level the building.
Do you have any more personnel in the area?
Don't see any right now.
No.
Get ready! Get ready! Offsetting. Get ready! Get ready! He fell. Just trying to lead him.
Frag to get him.
Good, chip 3-1. Now if you go directly west, about approximately 100 meters, you'll see a single hot spot there. That's the cave or tunnel entrance. Yeah, direct hits right there.
Get ready! Get ready! Offsetting for the howitzer.
Guy moving, guys moving.
Got him.
Lots of guys.
No box, no box.
Coming out of the
One
hole.
runner.
I'm
Running out of
trying to
there.
All right, got three.
There, you got it.
Hey! Get ready!
Still, you got two of them there.
Get ready! Back on the other guys.
All right, you got the other guy. That landed probably within 2 feet of
That
him.
one's still crawling there.
Yep.
That guy's still moving.
It's
The
two
one
of
up
them
to
right.
the south.
Oh,
Direct.
Yes.
Get ready! Get ready!
Let's hold up and look around here. I know those two guys. I saw them flying apart.
yeah,
Yeah, I got that guy too.
I saw him die earlier. He was in 40 round.
Direct. Get ready! Get ready!
Guy's moving.
Yeah, he is.
He went down that embankment. He was protected.
Oh,
Direct.
Yes.
Get ready! Get ready! Don't
this
see
could be
any
a
other
highlight
movement.
film.
Permission to go back to the compound?
Go meet him search, man.
Yeah, go ahead and head on back to the compound.
And of course you can't see any blood. But it's like, it's just mowing down these, you know, dozens of people on the ground and exploding buildings where they are, and, you know, it's just so, it's appalling. And this is war now. I mean, this is, you know, it's like, it's just one big video game. And speaking of video games, Michael Prinz was talking about, I mean, it's been well known now that the US military uses video games to recruit, you know, young people. And now they're actually on Twitch, you know, the live streaming program, gaming program Twitch. There's actually US military now doing these sort of live streams and engaging with, you know, 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds, encouraging them to ask questions about the military. Twitch is being used as a recruitment for the military for young 10 and 12-year-olds to groom them. It's grooming them to join this appalling US empire and its immoral wars. I mean, that's just child abuse. It's absolutely hideous. So, you know, and that's sort of, you know, but the US has been, the military has been recruiting at schools and all sorts of things, and now they're on these gaming things, you know. And this is a very interesting thing that Michael Prinz said, that a lot of soldiers, when they're in Afghanistan and elsewhere, they actually, when they're not going around and sort of attacking civilians and killing and stuff, then they go, because they're not really supposed to be using drugs, they then go back to their barracks and play these war games. So it's like a 24/7 thing. I mean, isn't that just appalling? It's just, and then we wonder why they're all killing themselves, you know, when they get back home, because this is just absolutely appalling and immoral. I mean, war has always been, no matter if it's like a video game or whether it was in the trenches back in 1914 or whatever, it's just appalling. And they're always, wars are always done for oligarchs. You know, they invent reasons to start wars to get more hegemony in regions and get more money and whatever. You know, we're idiots that we allow this to, you know, and they also set up in the United States, it's a poverty draft where people are so poor that they think that they'll get all these benefits and be able to, you know, pay for a college and all this if they go to the army. And then they keep sending them back on tours until they either get killed or they come back and they're in such a mental state that they end up suiciding at a rate of 22 soldiers a day. 22 military people a day are killing themselves. This year, you know, 5,000–6,000 military people have killed themselves so far. More than people that are killed on the ground in these so-called battles, which are just really slaughters of people. You know, I mean, this is just so immoral in all sorts of ways. Killing poor people. I mean, Mike Prinz said when he was in Iraq, he said he realized that he was the terrorist. He was the terrorist.
To all those serving in the Army and the Marines and the Air Force and the Navy, that you have the absolute right to refuse to take part in these criminal wars, and that's a right that all of you should exercise. You have no reason to go put your life on the line and kill and die for profit. We've been to Iraq, we've been to Afghanistan, and we know what these wars are really about. And we joined the military for many reasons. Because we need a college education, because we need a job, because we need health care. And then we joined the military, and they tell us that our enemies are poor people in caves in Afghanistan, or poor people in the deserts of Iraq. But we've been to those countries, and we know that our enemies are not other poor people abroad. Our enemies are the people that laid us off from our jobs, that that denied us health care, that make it impossible to get an education. Our enemies are not in the poorest countries on the planet, but right here in the richest one.
And he found himself, you know, when he was supposed to be interrogating this old man, and I think he had to slam a chair against a wall beside this old man's face. And he realized he was the terrorist. And he started feeling like he wanted to protect this old man. When people would go out of the room, he'd be worried about how this old guy was. And it was almost this unspoken thing, actually, between different soldiers that were involved in those interrogations, that they would be almost like protecting these people in between these, because they could see what they were doing. These are just people. They have nothing to do with anything. You know, they're just like you and I. They just happen to be in what turns out to be the wrong place because their country has a lot of oil or whatever. You know? Look, there's a little paddy melon coming along behind me. Some of the older paddy melons come up during the day to get some food. Just some pellets, kangaroo pellets and carrots. And this little guy's coming over to see if I've got things together. But anyway, I don't know about you, but I just find this all so tragic. This world didn't have to be like this. And it looks like we're going to go extinct from climate crisis, climate chaos. I really think we are. I keep asking people to go vegan firstly for animals and then for the planet. Even though I think we really are going extinct, but this is how we're going out now. Where there's more and more push for more wars. Iran is on the target list. You know, Russia and China are on the target list of US empire. And this is all about full spectrum dominance, and we've got the full support of the Fourth Estate. They're just an arm of the military-industrial complex at this point, the propaganda arm. And this is where we're at now. Isn't it just fucking tragic? Isn't it? Don't you find it tragic? This, as a species, this is where we're at, where all we can do now is murder and kill and subjugate and dominate, and there's a small group of people who want more and more money. And would it be any fun if they didn't have a whole bunch of people that didn't have anything? You know, if they had as much, if everybody, just say as a hypothetical, everybody in the world had as much as they did, right? These rich 1%. They wouldn't be happy, because most of their happiness, most of their delight, and this is like people like Rupert Murdoch, is having their foot on the necks of everyday people and seeing people having much less than they do. That's most of the fun, you know, of being rich. It's not actually having lots of things. Most of it is this feeling of having power over other people and having more than these other people who will never ever have anything, the sort of things they have. And this is the sort of world we've created. I was just saying to my partner just last night, and this might be something I might talk about in another video, but I personally don't fit in with this world. I'm an outsider, and also because I'm from the LGBT community. I don't like labeling myself really, but unfortunately at times I do, because it seems like this is all we're able to do as a species, is put people in categories. But I'm an outsider on a number of levels, including being vegan as well. And anti-imperialist and anti-war makes you also an outsider with a lot of people, because they don't get it. And you sound like a nutty conspiracy theorist when you talk about US empire. But I'm an outsider on lots of levels. if I was black, I'd be even more so, whatever. But you know, what I'm saying is, I've never felt in my entire life like I belong in the way this world is structured. You know, it doesn't make sense how it's structured. It's anti-people, and it's anti-non-human animals. It's anti, you know, it's anti the earth. The way it's all structured, and capitalism has a lot to do with it. But we're all just kind of trapped in this dysfunctional situation where there's probably very little way we can actually, particularly at this point, turn it around. It's like capitalism is it's morphing into fascism. The push for war is so full on now, they don't even care if they look like they have any reasons at all. They don't care. They just make up rubbish through the mainstream media. You know, to the point where it's like The Onion, that satire thing. I don't, you know, I don't enjoy living in a world that's structured like this, and I've just had to make the best of it, like so many people. And yet, I'm actually in a much better position than a lot of people in the world. You know, in much better position, because I'm not black, or I'm not in some Middle Eastern country, I'm not Palestinian, and yet we should all care about everything that's happening in the world. We should be internationalist, we should be international human rights activists. But for a long time I was ignorant to what was going on in the world, being a white person and having a lot of, you know, having privilege of being a white person and having a reasonable upbringing with pretty much everything that I needed. We weren't wealthy by any means, but I had what I needed to get by. And we had free education, and we still have, to some degree, free healthcare in Australia. But you know, there's a lot of people in the world who've never had any of that. It's been dreadful, dreadful, dreadful for them, and it doesn't have to be like that. It never had to be like that. And now it's just getting worse and worse. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. You know, so anyway, I'm going to talk about this another time, about that feeling of not belonging, really, and about how on earth can we possibly have mental health when we are living in such a dysfunctionally structured, it's so badly structured and doesn't make sense, really, and is so anti-people and anti-non-human animals and anti-planet and all of that. How could we possibly, and anti-community too. We're all fractured, and there's this complete loss of community through neoliberalism and all of that. How could we possibly be okay in a mental health sense? It's no wonder so many people have got depression now. Anyway, so I've gone off the track a bit here, but that's my, you know, the thing about Syria. It's just really for show. And they'll be back there again, the US empire, because they can't help it. Their idea is to completely take over the Middle East and then knock off China and Russia. And that's not hyperbole. If you follow everything, if you follow independent news, that's where it is. It's full spectrum dominance, and anybody who stands in the way of that is going to be a target. Anyhow, so I might stop here. I was going to talk about Israel and the anti-BDS, the anti-BDS legislation that is being pushed throughout the United States, and how one woman was sacked because she wouldn't sign a declaration that she wasn't going to support any boycott, divestments and sanctions of Israel. And so that's actually sort of a thing in the United States, completely unconstitutional, but then there's a lot of things that are problematic about the Constitution, and it's problematic about the way the US functions. But so that's something I might talk about at another time, which is kind of frightening, because that's how South Africa apartheid was brought to an end, through boycott, divestments and sanctions. And that's probably the only way, in some ways, well, one of the major ways to end apartheid in Israel and the oppression of the Palestinians is for the BDS movement. So, you know, but that's the United States, and they're trying to make out like when you are against apartheid that you're anti-Semitic, which is very funny. It's funny too in that Arabs are Semites too. I would say being against the BDS movement is actually anti-Semitic. And one more thing I want to say about Israel is the Israeli government has been supporting a lot of fascist governments, like in Poland and whatever, and in fact they're actually propping up anti-Semitism. So, you know, the Zionist movement is actually promoting anti-Semitism. So think about that for a moment. When you hear people calling Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite for supporting Palestinian rights, remember that the Israeli government is actually propping up anti-Semitic, governments. Okay, well, my name's Trish Roberts. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, and please click the notifications button, the bell. Otherwise, you don't get any updates. I hope you join me next time. Please feel free to leave comments. I would like people to leave comments because it's good to get some feedback. Otherwise, I feel like I'm just talking to myself. Please keep it civil. Okay, so anyway, you're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, bye for now.